Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Half and Half this morning. It is chilly in this part of the country. It was 2 degrees earlier this morning. I'm sure it's not 2 degrees anymore, but I want to give that report for my dad and not for my mom. My mom would not like that report, but my dad would be very excited to hear that it's 2 degrees and really happy that he lives in the South. And maybe others of you live in the South and are really happy to hear that you don't have 2 degree weather. But yeah, it's cold here. Got cold here, but sunny, which is one of the great things about living in this part of the um, world when it's really cold. And a lot of times you get really beautiful sun. So silver linings all over the place. So today I have a towel. You could use a yoga strap too, or a belt, or whatever you use. We're going to use that later, I think. Not totally sure. But I do want to talk about foot and knee and ankle, and then shin is a part of that as well. Obviously, it connects your foot and your knee and your ankle, and it's kind of part of that. Um, but looking at that alignment and how we stand and how you bend your knees when you stand. So how you lunge or how you climb up a stair would be like a functional part of that movement there. Um, so one of the things that you've heard in your life, I think, I've heard it in my life, especially in more the traditional fitness class, is that you don't let your knee ever go in front of your toes when you're doing something. And sometimes in doing like squats, they'll even say really specifically put all your weight back on your heels and don't put any weight on your toes. And so then sometimes when we start doing functional practices, people will always try to keep that alignment through there. And you have this kind of straight knee over ankle position. And then we start to believe that we should never let the knee go forward of the toe. But that's not actually true, right? Like it is a normal position. And if you think of like if you were a body that would go into a full squat on the floor, which I'm not going to necessarily ask you to do, but if you are that body that goes all the way into the squat on the floor, your knee is going to have to go beyond your heel. It's going to have to go in front of your ankle. And there certainly are. Not so much in America, but in other parts of the world, people go into that position their whole lives. So there's potential to do that. Although most of us who live in a world where there are lots of chairs and we get in chairs really young lose that ability at some point to do that position. So that aside, we're not necessarily trying to get all the way into that squat today by any means, but just to give a sense of like, oh, that is a functional movement. But it is something we kind of lose the ability to do. Our knees, we get older, they start not bending quite as easily. Our feet are not super adaptable and functional. And everything just kind of gets tight in our hips and all this kind of stuff. So if we want to think about just starting to get the knee a little forward of the ankle, that's as much as we're going to do today. So the heel down, but the knee a little more over the toes or slightly forward of the ankle through here. So I'm getting the cue that you can't see me to the side. So I'm going to turn my foot to the side, or I can just turn to the side. If I'm sitting in my chair and my knee is over my heel, right, that's it right there. Slide it back a little. I don't know if you're in a chair. If you are, it'd be great to play with this. Slide your foot back a little bit. Can you still feel your heel on the floor? If so, slide it back a little more. Can you still pretty easily get the heel on the floor? Just play with it. There's going to come a moment where your heel won't really go down anymore, right? So that's too far. We do want to get the whole foot down for today's purposes at least. Find the place where it's like, okay, I can get my heel down, but if I go much farther, my heel's going to come up. And I would say, you don't even have to be right at the edge of getting the heel up. That's probably too forced. Go to like 80% or something, right? If 100% is just back here, I'm not gonna go slightly in front of it. I'm gonna go a little farther in front of it. And then see like how far does your knee go in front of your ankle, in front of your toes? What's that position? If you think about relaxing your calf a little more, does that help the heel feel a little more grounded? You don't have to push it down. You just want to feel the whole foot. If you think of relaxing behind your knee, like the hollow in the back of your knee, maybe that helps a little. And maybe notice how you're sitting up on your sits bones, how that releases. Now, these are always connected: hip, knee, ankle, foot. They work together. They're supposed to work together. So whenever you change one aspect, you're going to have to look at the other stuff, because I might get my knee to bend a lot, but I'm really, really tight in my hip. I haven't really made any gains there. I've lost this to gain this, so I don't have any net gain. So I want to let this be as released as it can be, this be as released as it can be. And then I also want to get this front of the ankle to release as much as possible. And that one's, I think, kind of an interesting one. We're going to look at that one standing. So maybe you did both feet. I just did one foot. If you just did one foot, try the other foot. Where does that ankle get to where you really feel like, okay, my heel's really down, my toes are really down, but it's back at about that 80% mark. Where do my knees end up, right? I mean, some people, some of you, especially if your knees have some damage, your heels may still be in front of your knee. So that's good information. You may be someone who, like, your knee doesn't go beyond your toes when you bend them. But you could sort of simply work with some of that imagery to slowly get it a little more range in your ankle, a little more range in your knee, a little more range in your hip through there. Now, yeah, find that place, take a look at it, get a sense of it. Sit for a moment, feel your sits bones, and then think of your toes spreading out. Think of the outside edge of your foot relaxing a little bit. We do this all the time lying on your back, like just breathe and release extra tension. Sometimes we work to make a shape, which is fine, but then you get into it and it's like, oh, it was a little extra. I just need to, like, dust off the extra that was there. Now, little test here would be to then take your weight a little forward. So if you lean your body a little forward, now I have to do more crease in my hip to do that. I've started to put some weight on my feet just by leaning my body a little forward. Did your heels come up? And did they need to come up? So if they needed to come up, then maybe your foot is a little too far back still. If you could say, oh, just relax the back of your knee, relax your ankle, relax your hip a little more, and your heel stayed pretty grounded, then good, you're in a good spot. And then come back. So play with that movement just a little bit, a little lean forward. I'm taking my whole pelvis forward, feeling how I start to get some weight on my feet. My thighs shoot forward a little more. My toes still spreading out. You know, I like my big gecko toes. And then coming back. And I'm leaning pretty far forward. You don't have to lean that far forward. Might be better for you to lean a little less. And feel that. This is also a way to not feel like everything's in your quads. So we want healthy quad work, but we don't want the quads to do everything. We want other stuff to assist the quads. And then relax all that. Maybe take it out the other way, right? Let everything kind of stretch out. And then we're going to use your towel or strap or whatever you got to play with some of that feeling as well. So we're going to go on to your back. I'm going to take my stool out of the way. And then we're just going to see if there's a little bit more range in that foot. So hooking your kitchen towel or whatever kind of towel you have. And if you find the ends aren't really long enough, maybe you need Another option, which I'm not being great at coming up with. Maybe you could go on the diagonals. Diagonals gives you a little more length to feel this. Maybe you have just a slightly longer towel somewhere. Maybe you just grab like a belt. If you're someone who wears belts, you could just grab a belt and hook it around your foot. A scarf, it might stretch out your scarf, but that might work too. So then we're just going to look at that same thing. Now, I don't want to straighten my leg. That's not my goal today. I'm not trying to stretch my hamstring. I actually want it a little bent. I don't want it super bent, but I want it bent enough that I don't feel a ton of pull on my hamstring. My hamstrings are pretty loose. I don't actually feel any stretch on my hamstring here, but I think for some people you're always going to feel some stretch on your hamstring, so just back off. Don't get a lot of stretch on your hamstring. And then push your foot more towards the pointed position, which is called plantar flexion, if you think in those terms. And then think of relaxing the front of your ankle, and then almost like you could use your arms to pull the towel to move your foot. You're not trying to move your foot, you're just trying to relax the front of your ankle. And then because you're doing a little pull with your arms, your foot moves. And then you just keep trying to release the front of your ankle. And then that's the dorsiflexion place. And then point it back up. And then try to relax the front of your ankle. So you think of a deep crease. You try to let the weight of your arms pull on the towel, which moves your foot. And try it a couple times. Definitely kind of a mind exercise too. Like you really have to think about not doing it from your foot muscles. And I would say it takes a few times. Like this third time through, I'm suddenly feeling a real difference in my calf. And I didn't feel that the first two times. So it takes a little bit of time and like concentration to not just grab around your shin and your calf to try and pull to flex the foot, but to really keep it relaxed and breathe. And then take that down and relax. And sometimes it makes your head like a little tense. So you just be done with it for a second and let everything go. Now, feel both legs on the floor. So for me, my whole side feels more relaxed. Whole left side now. Down, hip, glute, thigh, knee, calf, ankle, foot. Everything feels a little heavier, a little different than the other side. And actually, even my left shoulder feels a little different. Like it just feels like my whole side got a little more grounded. So you may or may not feel that. Sometimes people do, sometimes they don't, but it's a very integrative thing to do, to just take a moment and observe. If you do notice something, great. If you don't, well, okay. You just ask a question and then maybe the answer will come later. So let's see what the other side's like. So knee not too straight, and you really got to keep it here. It's really easy to try and make your foot move by straightening and bending your knee, which is not your foot, right? This is why when your friends ask you, what did you learn in half and half today? You can say, I learned my knee is not my foot. But it's true. So relaxing around your hip, keeping the knee so it's not too much pull on the hamstring. And then relax your ankle. so that the foot can move. Flexed foot, dorsiflexion, either one of those names. And then pushing into the towel or belt, plantar flexion, pointed foot, those are the same thing. And then relax your ankle. Let your towel move your foot. And keep relaxing and relaxing in the front of the ankle, and the back of the knee, and the front of the hip. And finishing up this one. Man, the third time is really the charm. It happened on this one too for me. When I did it the third time, it was like, oh, feel all this other stuff now. Patience, right? Just practice and see what happens. So now let's do it again. How does it feel in your body? How does that whole right side feel, or second side feel? How does the first side feel? And again, for me, I get a sense of weight really through the whole back of the body. It all feels a little more spread out now. And then take your knees into your chest. We're going to move up to standing and play with some of the stuff standing. So come over onto your hands and feet. And then you're kind of in that same position again in a forward bend with both feet. So bend your knees however much so that you're not doing too much pull on the hamstring. You can let your chest fall onto your thighs. And then even now, this position right here, you could think I want my heels down, but my knees moving a little forward in front of my ankles. You could play with the same thing we did sitting. So push your weight back a little bit. Feel when it's really on your heels. And then start to let your weight come forward a little. Your knees start to move over your toes without letting your heels come up. What's that range for you? My range might be bigger than your range, or it might be smaller than your range. And then find kind of a mid place where you feel you're balanced. Your knees are kind of just in front of your ankles, not very far in front of your ankles, just a tiny bit in front of your ankles. And that's where we want to stand to roll up and start to come up to standing. So in general, when you're standing, walking around, kind of what is neutral? Neutral is going to be when the weight of your pelvis is centered towards the front part of the ankle. Typically, people will say, and people have different ideas about this, and I don't know exactly who's right, but I think it makes sense to feel like your weight is balanced between the front and back of the foot, and that we could call that neutral, right? So when you're standing, that could be an image you have, that your knees are a little bent, they might be a little forward of your heels, your pelvis is kind of centered over the foot, not too far back, not too far forward. You can still really get your heels down. And we could call that neutral. And then, of course, you're going to move in and out of neutral all the time when you're walking and moving and sitting and standing. But you know where your home base is. And all this balance work we've done the last couple weeks, this is also useful for that feeling, right? When I stand on one foot where am I? Where is my pelvis? I want it pretty much centered between the front and back of the foot through there, right? So what we just did, that nice easy front of the ankle release as you flex and point your foot. Now, if we take that standing, that is basically bending and straightening your knee, right? So when my leg is straight, the front of my ankle isn't doing much. When I bend my knee, the more I bend my knee, the more I'm in that like dorsiflexed position, and the front of my ankle has to really release to go down and up. So just try it out. You're in your parallel position, toes pointing forward, weight pretty centered. Bend your knees. Think of your pelvis going straight down. Feel how the knees glide a little forward. The front of the ankle relaxes. Heels stay on the floor, toes stay on the floor. And if your heels come off the floor, well, that's too far. Don't bend your knees quite so much. Straighten. Pelvis stays centered. Knees go forward. Heels keep dropping. Back of the knee relaxing. Front of the ankle relaxing. Hips relaxing. Straighten. And just take it a couple times. In dance class, we call this demi-plie because it means small bend or like half bend, something like that. But it doesn't have to be as far as possible, right? It's like a half bend. Somebody might tell me half isn't right. I'm not sure demi translation, but that's essentially what it means. And you know, I like my toes. And when I really get things moving the way I want them to move, instead of feeling my toes pull in and retract, I feel my toes actually spread out more. So it's another image you could use, is letting the toes really spread out and the ankle release. And one more. And then let's try this open leg position. Now, this one's kind of interesting. Depending on how wide your feet are, that's going to dictate a little bit how low your pelvis can go, keeping your heels down. So let's play with it a little. Bring your heels pretty narrow. So like your sits bones and your heels are almost on the same line, maybe a little wider than that, but your legs are turned out, your toes are pointing out. Same image you were using before, your pelvis goes straight down. Now, if your pelvis goes back, it's also a little different. So we're going to do straight down. Front of the ankles release, heels stay heavy, knees release. How low do you go? Not super low. Hopefully, if you're going super low, something else is going on. Probably you're leaning forward a little, or your heels are coming out. Or you have very, very flexible ankles. It also sometimes means your arches are falling. It could be a lot of different things. So you don't really, it's not a goal to go super low in this position. And then see what it's like to go a little wider. Not the widest, just a little wider. So maybe heels are like my fingers, maybe something like that. I don't know. Just a little more space. Moving out beyond my hips. Same thing. Pelvis goes straight down. Knees go out over the toes. Heels keep dropping. Now I can go lower. And back up. And feeling that. Pelvis straight down. Knees moving a little beyond the toes. Ankles release, heels release. And again, if I wanted to go lower, I might lean forward, but that's not the goal right now. And back up. And a couple more of those. Toes spread out. Okay, now let's try one more, a little bit wider. And this little bit wider is where people often go right away. But if I go super wide, I'm not going to get the knee beyond the toe feeling, right? Like my knee is going to stay back on my heels super wide. So bringing the heels in just a little lets me practice this thing we're talking about. And this is going to give me the most potential for getting lower and back up. And playing with that movement a little bit. And maybe ribs connecting in the front. Nice wide groin. This is also a way to get the pelvic floor to spread out a little. Sits bones get a little wider. Now let's play with some of that as you go down this time. Stay there. Right heel floats up. Release the heel back, just kind of over towards the other heel. Do the right side again. Up. And the heel goes down, but it also reaches kind of back towards my sits bone. Take the left side. And back up. Knees lengthening out, sits bone spreading out. Left heel goes. Really long inner thigh. Other side. And then coming up. Well, that was surprisingly difficult for me. I don't know how it was for you, but it was a lot. But it was great. It felt super connected all the way through, right? And so that's really one of the definitions of functional movement, is that it's not necessarily targeting one spot and another spot. It's targeting how all the spots connect to each other and work together and coordinate. So even though in Pilates all the time we isolate different things, in the end, we want to put them all together and make sure we can move well with everything together. So let's try a little bit of the side lunge. So we'll take maybe something to hold on to. This one's pretty hard for balance. This is a pretty advanced position for balance for a lot of us because it's so parallel. And turning the feet out always gives you better balance. So because you're so parallel, it's really tricky. So hang on to something if you want. So toes pointing forward, really pointing forward. Take a look and make sure it's true. And then we start, I'm not too wide apart, right? Just a little bit. And then we start with that plantar flexion, pushing the ball of the foot down, front of the ankle opens up, like you did with the towel. Release the front of the ankle, drop the heel. Push the ball of the foot, ankle opens. Release the front of the ankle. Heel reaches down and back. Pelvis ends up coming forward. And pelvis goes back. And then forward, you're on your front foot. Now's where we get the more challenging balance position. Bend the front knee, goes a little forward. Slide the back foot. So now I can't get my heel down, right? It's a little off. My knee is forward of my toe. Forward of my ankle. Maybe even a little forward of my toe, but my heel is down. And we try it here. Pressing up. Knee glides forward. Heel stays down, ankle releases. And pressing up. And knee goes forward. Heel stays down, ankle releases. Pelvis is going straight up and down like a carousel. Like a little carousel horse going straight up and down. Now, if you're feeling the movement on your front foot, and it seems pretty clear to you, You could think about what's happening in the back foot too, because there's that movement in the ankle of the back foot that's pretty natural. As I go up, pointing, kind of plantar flexion. As I go back, dorsiflexion. And last one. And we better do the other side before I get kicked off. So, small distance, feet in line with the hips, pelvis centered between the two. Push the back foot, ankle opens up on the back foot. Release the front of the ankle, heel back down. Pelvis gets pushed onto your front foot. Heel stays down on your front foot too. And then staying forward, bend your front knee. Back foot goes back. And we go up and down carousel. My carousel is my torso. My carousel pole is my torso. My torso goes straight down. Front knee glides forward. Heel stays down. My carousel pole goes straight up. Ankle opens. Dorsiflexion, knee forward. Plantar flexion, ankle opens up. One more. And then coming back together. Okay, so hopefully that feels pretty good. And we'll let Scott come in and give us a little more thought-provoking stuff. After he says hello to the kitten, he needed to do that for a moment.
All right. So let's continue that thread. And I really appreciate having that full range of motion in the ankles. And as many of you have heard me talk about before, is way back in the day when I was first learning how to do yoga, people were telling me is that when you bend your knee, never let your knee go beyond your heel because all sorts of terrible things will happen. And it was always kind of indeterminate what those terrible things would be, but it was always like the skull and crossbones, like don't ever think of doing that when you do your yoga. And then what I ended up doing is looking around in my life, and I saw that I took my knee beyond my heel hundreds, if not thousands, of times a day. That every time I went upstairs or downstairs or walked down an incline, sat in a chair, that my knee was consistently in front of my heel, and as Collette mentioned in passing, sometimes even out in front of my toes. So let's pick up where you left off. Step your feet pretty wide apart and turn your legs out a bit. Let that external rotation arise from your hip sockets. And now a slight variation to the theme. Let the fronts of your ankles soften. Let that invite your shins forward, knees bending. And let a little deeper flexion occur in your pelvis and your hip sockets. So you end up leaning forward. Then come on back up. So we're initiating this from the fronts of the ankles. Exhale, soften fronts of the ankles, shins forward. Inhale. Let's do two more like that. So you can do this keeping your torso straight up and down, or you can do this with your torso inclining a little bit forward. They both have benefits. So now let's turn both your feet back toward the front. And now let's focus a little bit more on this side, your right side. To do so, turn your left foot in, and then your right foot out. We're going to use the same locus of control. So we tend to focus on, oh, I'm going to bend my knee. I invite you to bring awareness down into your ankle, your right ankle. And as you work down with Collette, let the front of that ankle soften to invite the shin to move forward, knee to bend, flexion in your hip. and come on up. So notice how I'm taking my knee well beyond my heel. Exhale, bend. Inhale up. Now, of course, this puts a strain on your knee, or if you have an anterior cruciate ligament injury, then you're going to know what your limitations are. But in the absence of pain or non-surgically treated ACL injury, this is a normal, healthy movement in your knee, one you'd make going upstairs or going downstairs. So now let's pause with your knee more or less over your arch. Now let your toes spread out on the floor. Let the entire breadth of the ball of your foot settle into the floor. And then press your forefoot down to float your heel up. And then slowly over a count of 5, descend that heel down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Contact. Let that whole foot sink into the floor. Take that whole right foot, press it down. Watch how that creates the lift up. Turn back to the front. And then step both feet together. So kind of like you did at the outset on your back, you did one side, then not the other side. So similarly, we get to check in here. First question is, what do you feel in your body? Open-ended question. Then, second question, do the two sides feel the same? If not, how do they feel different? What I'm personally feeling, it seems like this leg is even longer. So we probably better do the other side, shouldn't we? All right, step your feet wide apart. Turn your right foot in and then your left foot out. Now, typically our locus of control is I am going to bend my knee. So we're going to flip that around a little bit. Bring awareness to the front of that ankle. Let it soften and let that cascade bring your shin forward, in turn bending your knee and flexing your hip. Then up from the front of your ankle. Exhale, initiate ankle dorsiflexion. Inhale up. And same thing holds true on this knee. If you have pain, then don't take your knee as far forward. Or if you have a non-surgically reconstructed ACL, then your doctor or your PT has told you what your range of motion is. But for most of the rest of us, this is going to be daily usage range of motion, and we're just reinforcing that, strengthening that. Now let's do one more bend, and then we'll pause there for a spell. That's how you say it when it's 2 degrees. We're going to stay here for a spell. All right. So then letting your whole left foot sink into the floor, with a particular focus on your toes settling into the floor, the whole breadth of the ball of your foot settling into the floor. And then take your whole forefoot, sink it down into the floor to float your heel up. And this works a lot of the intrinsic muscles that support healthy feet. Slowly over a count of 5, descend that left heel down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, contact. Take a moment here to settle your whole foot into the mat. Then press your left foot down to come up. Newton's third law of working with the body. And then stepping your 2 feet together. So let's have the same open-ended question. We did something on one side, then the other side, now both sides. What do you feel in your body? Are the two sides the same? They don't need to be. If not, How do they differ? All right. So now we're going to work toward the floor to work with yoga pose head down dog. So let's use a partial sun salutation to make our way there. Begin with an inhale, a little bit deeper. Exhale, sweep your arms up, risk of going out of the screen when you're really tall. And then inhale, folding. Exhale, stretch the crown of your head forward. And then inhale, step your feet back. So in addition to in yoga being taught that the knees should never go beyond the heels, when I was taught this dog pose here, I was admonished to get my heels as close to the floor as possible. And it took years and years and years before I realized that in my attempt to do so, I'd introduced more tension that restricted the freedom of motion. So rather than taking your heels down, just like we did in standing, press the balls of your feet and your toes down to lift your heels up. Now, remember how you work to the fronts of your ankles? Let the fronts of your ankles soften. Let the softening of the fronts of your ankles invite your heels down. And rather than trying to push them down, release them down. And we'll take a few breaths right here. And then come on down. All right, so let's move onto our backs. And it's going to be somewhat of a reprise of what you did a little bit earlier, variation of the theme. So let's start with bringing your left leg in. Catch your hands behind your knee. Ooh, hands are cold. Are your hands cold too? I should have worn long pants or something. Anyway, cold notwithstanding, use your arms to draw your thigh in, good and close to your torso. And then we're going to start with your foot in dorsiflexion. Remember how we got there? Release the front of your ankle so that your toes move toward your knee. That's dorsiflexion. To keep your ankle in dorsiflexion as you slowly, slowly take your foot up, heel still pointing, heel still pointing, heel still pointing. Touch your resistance, your limit. Then keeping there, moving from dorsiflexion to plantar flexion. And then bring your foot down. Now, keep your foot in plantar flexion like it is as you slowly raise up. Now, at a certain point, you're going to touch some resistance here. It's really tempting to let your thigh come away from your torso. So use your arms to keep it snug in. And then more than likely, you can see the front of your ankle. As you look at it, if possible, let it relax and move from plantar flexion to dorsiflexion. And then lower that leg down. So you're still in dorsiflexion. Now let's do that one more time. Stay in dorsiflexion, go up, touch the resistance, stay there as you go from dorsiflex to plantar flex. Keep the foot in plantar flex as you come down. Keep the foot in plantar flex as you go up. Touch the resistance. Park your lower leg down there. Let the front of your ankle relax. Move from plantar flex to dorsiflex. And releasing down. So just like you did a little bit earlier. Rest both feet on the floor, both knees bent, and asking the open-ended question, what do I feel in my body? Do the two sides feel different? So that's about embodying. This is a very powerful, practical way to work with feeling anxious, is to feel your body. So let's continue this thread. Now bring your right leg in. Hopefully your hands are a little bit warmer here. Catch behind your knees. Yeah, not really any warmer. Maybe I ought to work on my circulation. So releasing the front of your ankle to move into dorsiflexion. Keep that dorsiflexion as you take your foot up, 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 up. Touch the resistance. Then move from plantar flex to dorsiflex. Point your foot. Keep your foot pointed as you come down. And keep your foot pointed in plantar flexion as you go up. Arms help hold your thigh in. Contact your end range of motion. Then stay there as you release the front of your ankle, moving from plantar flexion to dorsiflexion. And keeping dorsiflexion as you lower your lower leg down. And then one more, a little bit quicker. Dorsiflex, take your leg up. Plantar flex, take your leg down. Plantar flex up. Remember how we make dorsiflexion? Not by forcing it, by releasing the front of the ankle, letting it go soft and back down. All right, so now let's move back to hands and knees. So then, on hands and knees, turn your toes under. You probably see this one coming. Lift your knees and hips up. And then you can take a peek back at your feet. Press your forefoot down to lift your heels up. Now building on what we did on our backs, let the fronts of your ankles release. And let that in turn invite your heels down. And then just touching the resistance, no need to push more deeply into it. As you continue releasing the fronts of your ankles. Now if you'd like a little bit more challenge, 5% straighten your knees. We'll pause there for a couple of breaths. If you'd like a little bit more challenge, another 5% straighten your knees. And we're going to hold here for a count of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then coming down. All right, so now locating your towel. Now we're going to use the towel as a little bit of padding. So right now you can probably see I'm kneeling. Some people, it's really uncomfortable to kneel. So quite often that's because the ground is too hard. So using your towel or a blanket or what have you to pad your knees. So what typically happens because of stiffness in the fronts of the ankles is the feet come together what's called sickling. So have your feet point straight back behind you. And the fronts of your ankles probably won't be on the floor. But remember that cue, release the fronts of your ankles. And maybe they can drop a little bit more toward the floor. So that's going to open up the tops of the toes, tops of the feet, fronts of the ankles, and shins. And that may seem to be really far distant down there, but that actually relates very directly to higher up in your body. So now to work with your posture. Bring your pelvic bowl forward in front of you. To keep your pelvic bowl forward like it is. Now take the front of your pelvis and lift the front of your pelvis up toward the ceiling. And you feel how that lifts your chest up? It holds your head up. So now to work a little bit more directly in some of the parts of the leg where we tend to hold a lot of tension. Toes point back behind you. Lifting your pelvic crest. Pelvis more forward in front of you. Then flow energy down the outsides of your thighs, grounding down through the outsides of your knees. Feel how that engaged your belly? All right, we're in the home stretch here. Take both your arms forward, right between your shoulder blades. Take a deep inhale. Now with the exhale, sweep your arms up, let your gaze track along with. Keep that lift of your pelvic crest, pelvis forward in front of you. Deep inhale here. Exhale, arms down. And moving back to head down dog position. So let's take a few moments here quietly. Remember how we release the fronts of the ankles for the heels to naturally descend down, and we lightly straighten the knees. So now doing those two on your own. And then coming down to your knees. Now we're going to end with a few moments of sitting practice. So sitting on either a chair or a stool, or if you prefer a meditation cushion. And so in many different traditions, it's said that your ability to focus your mind on your intention predicts well-being. And for a lot of us, we get distracted. This thought becomes that thought, becomes the other thought. And we're not paying attention to what we're doing. Or not paying attention to the person we're with. So what we're going to do is, in training that attention, is count exhales. So with each exhale, count 1. Next exhale, 2. 3. And so forth. As you continue that practice, how many of you got distracted, lost count? It's common, it's normal. So when you lose count, no need to beat yourself up. Gently begin again. Start again with 1, 2, 3, and so on. And when you get distracted, if possible with a smile on your face, begin again. And the mind, just like the body, you can train your muscles to get stronger. You can do cardio to change your vascular system and remodel your heart. So too, the mind can be trained. And this is one of many techniques. 1 count per out breath. Get distracted? No problem. Hit the reset button and start afresh. Few more breaths like this. All right. How'd that go? A little work with the body, a little work with the mind. So any comments, questions in the chat today? Okay, great to hear. So a lot of comments, it sounds like, not necessarily any questions. Really glad you could join us today. If you haven't already, could you subscribe to our YouTube channel? It's that red button right underneath your screen. And if you subscribe, it really helps us out a lot with our connection to the community through YouTube. So February 6th, Collette and I have a talk on well-being throughout the lifespan. And if you're getting a little bit older or you know somebody that is, we're going to be talking about how to work with that and not to have it as the enemy that we're going to slay, but how do we organically work with this experience that, if we're lucky, we all get to share. So thank you so much. Enjoy the day, and let's do this again really soon.